Okay, aloha mai kako. Aloha la Kūʻokoʻa kako. Super grateful to be here with this beautiful celebration of la Kūʻokoʻa. Our team at Native Hawaiian Student Services, we always talk about how throughout history we've always had grand celebrations of la Kūʻokoʻa. For those of you who might be familiar with actually that shirt that Kaipo's wearing back there, that's one of our screens that we've taken and circulated through our community for many years. That is a ticket for I believe the 1873 La Kūʻokoʻa celebration. That was the ticket to gain entrance into the party, basically. So we always think about how wonderful, the wonderful way in which our ancestors and our country honored this very important day throughout history. So I'm grateful to be a part of that this year out in this beautiful community. So my name is Nalani Balutsky. I'm a faculty member at UH Manoa. I'm originally from Kahalu'u. On my dad's side, I'm a Duvashell and Duduwa from Molokai, and my mom's side is from Maui. And yeah, so let's see, a little bit about me. I graduated from Kamehameha, so I grew up in Kahalu'u on Oahu, and went to Kamehameha, and then went away for my undergraduate degree, and then came home to do a master's degree in Hawaiian Studies, and now I'm doing a PhD in education. Was invited by Ilima. Ilima and I are good friends, and she's also part of this beautiful community of Hawaiian scholars that we have at UH. So today I'm sharing a little bit, kind of two hats. I'm a student. As I said, I'm a student at UH still after all these years, but I'm also a faculty member in the Hoʻoinuiakea School of Hawaiian Knowledge at UH. I write a lot of grants and create programs for Hawaiian students, one of which in the audience many years ago. So myself and others are part of this community at UH that are trying to carve out space for Hawaiians on our campus and create opportunities and programs for Hawaiian students to feel proud of who they are and also motivated and supported in their journey in higher education. So the program I'm going to share with you today, the Hawaiian Youth Abroad program, is a little bit of both. It's a little bit of my research, and it's a program that I created at the University of Hawaii for Hawaiian students today. And then the title of this presentation, the part that's in quotes, comes from a speech actually delivered by a Hawaiian Kingdom legislator, Robert Ho'opili Baker, and I'll explain a little bit about him at the end, but it's actually directly from a quote he delivered for La Kūʻokoʻa in 1885. So you'll learn more about the context of this quote and why I think it's meaningful for today. But a nation can scarcely be too lavish in the training of its children. So Native Hawaiian Student Services is a student support program on our campus. There are more Hawaiian students that attend UH Manoa than any other institution of higher education in the world. There's about 2,700 Hawaiian students on our campus, about 2,000 of which are undergraduate students pursuing bachelor's degrees in the 90 different majors we have on campus, and then about 700 graduate students, including PhD students. So it's an exciting place to be. I've worked there for about 13 years now, and from when I started 13 years ago till today, there's definitely been an increased sense of pride and presence of Hawaiian students on our campus. We're still only about 15% of the overall student body and only about 8% of faculty, but we are determined and strong trying to increase those numbers significantly. But that's who Native Hawaiian Student Services is, and I just wanted to contextualize our unit because that's where this program kind of was birthed out of. You can also see in this kind of mission of our unit, we prioritize and are explicit about things like affirming deoccupied futures, right? So we bring that kind of narrative into the work that we do serving Hawaiian students. We're very intentional about that history, and I think we're trying to do a better job at bringing out those histories in the support programs we have for Hawaiians. And then there's also a heavy research component, as you can see. So we say that research is the Native Hawaiian Student Services Hawaiian student retention philosophy, meaning that we take students, for example, to the archives, right, where we see evidence of what our kupuna, our country, our ancestors left behind for us. And when we see things like, down below is, does my mouse work on this? The bottom row, the second from the left, for example, is something that we, highlighted in one of our programs. That's the equivalent of the SATs at Lahaina Luna in the 1800s. And this one was, they were tested on the Constitution of the Hawaiian Islands, the senior class. So, when we're looking at what kind of things our kupuna, our country, engaged in the 19th century, it provides inspiration for students today. It makes them almost see that, hey, if my kupuna were lawyers and doctors and, social workers, I can do that today. So that's part of a core part of what we do at Native Hawaiian Student Services. So the Hawaiian Youth Abroad program, you'll see some archival photos here and some contemporary photos today because it was a program that was established during King Kūʻokoʻa's reign in 1880, and we brought it back to life. We try to revive a spirit of the Hawaiian Youth Abroad program in 2018. So we took 2 cohorts of students in 2018 and then another one in 2019. So this presentation is going to give you some context for both the original program in between 1880 and 1892, as well as the reinvigorated program that we still hope to continue to run today. So just as some context, I think it's important to note Kūʻokoʻa, because this program is birthed during his reign. Kūʻokoʻa is an interesting and I'd say a little different background and training before he became mo'i. So he had many careers. When he becomes mo'i, he was already a newspaper editor for Kahokuo Kapaki Pika. He was Postmaster General. So I always think about, we all know him to be the first mo'i to circumnavigate the globe, right? But I always think about when he was Postmaster General before he becomes mo'i, and he sees all this mail coming from every corner of the earth, and then he one day becomes mo'i and travels to these very places. These are the kinds of things that informed, I think, what he comes in thinking about, his philosophy, his positionality as head of state, were definitely probably informed by the careers he had prior to being mo'i. He also worked, he was in the military, the Hawaiian Kingdom military. He was King's Chamberlain. So, he had a very extensive career before he assumes the throne. So I mentioned the title of this presentation comes from a speech delivered by actually this Hawaiian Kingdom legislator, Robert Ho'opili Baker. And after he delivers this speech, and I'll share some really important quotes from the speech at the end of this presentation, but when he delivers this speech, it was kind of typed up and circulated in that editorial piece that you see on the far right. But he was a legislator who actually introduces the bill that would eventually fund the Hawaiian Youth Abroad program. So you can see this is from the legislative session of 1880. So this is happening in June of 1880. You can see that highlighted part shows that $15,000 in 1880 was appropriated for this program. This is the very first year. And then there will be subsequent appropriations in subsequent legislative sessions to give more funds to support the study abroad program. Oh, actually, before I show that, I always ask this because I'm always surprised. Does anybody know any of the original students? There were a total of 18 students who were funded by the Hawaiian Kingdom government to participate in the Hawaiian Youth Abroad program. Any names anybody know one of them? I sometimes ask because I'm always surprised at how many descendants of some of these original students are sometimes even in the room when we do these presentations. So these were the 18 Hawaiians who were supported by the Hawaiian Kingdom to participate in the study abroad program. There were 17 men and one woman. And you can also see by this kind of display here, they went in cohorts. So you can see the first 3 go to Italy in 1881. Those dates that you see listed here are not the total length of their program. A lot of them actually stayed for very many years. Like Robert Wilcox was in Italy for 6 years before he returned home. So those dates are just when they started their program. They went to 6 different countries. And then to also understand, people ask why did they go where they went? And, there's no internet searching at the time of like, and even the way we think about universities and higher education today, that does not exist at the time in the 1880s. In fact, many countries do not have formal structures for going to college or the university, and even when they do, it's often reserved for white men, the elite, or the clergy. So it was I would say it was probably a little difficult too for the Hawaiian Kingdom to secure these placements for our young people to even study in these places at the time. And no email to confirm their travel or them even being in school. It took a pretty bureaucratic feat to accomplish this. But these are their names. These are where they studied and when. So I have some pictures, not of all of them, but the first row is the first cohort who study in England. So Abraham St. Chad Pi'anaia would become Dr. Matthew Makalua, and then Joseph Kamauoha is on the top, and then on the bottom row is Robert Wilcox, James Booth, and Robert Boyd. The bottom three are the first cohort that study in Italy. I have a couple more pictures, I think. I don't have pictures of all of them, and this presentation doesn't go into depth of all of their studies, but it's just wonderful to see some snapshots of them. And often these photos are taken while they're away, in their programs of study in other countries. I'll just highlight one of them. Dr. Matthew Makalua is arguably considered the first Western-trained Hawaiian medical doctor, and he's also the longest supported in this program. So he leaves the first year that the program kicks off in 1881, and he's supported up until the overthrow, essentially, because he goes away not intending necessarily to study medicine and then declares medicine as his path, and then he stays for all different kind of certifications. And then I found a letter in Bishop Museum that I believe is from one of his descendants who was sending in a piece of correspondence between him and Kūʻokoʻa. And the correspondence said something along the lines of, so he never returns home to Hawaii, although he always intended to. He always was going to come home. But because of the events of the overthrow, he essentially, there's this narrative that he has no country to return home to since the Americans took over. He had already met a woman in England, married her, and started a family by the time he finished medical school. So he, again, never returns home. He starts a family in England, and he practices medicine for many years. So he's buried in Hastings. So we took our students to visit his grave. We took vai from Lahaina. We found fresh water from Lahaina, and we took it there and, gave ho'okupu to him. I'm gonna step back a little bit and kind of contextualize what I think, why we should be especially proud as Hawaiians that this is our program and this is what our kupuna and our country created. And these are what I consider the context of what makes the Hawaiian Youth Abroad program possible in 1880. It's only possible because we have a very robust and beautiful higher education system already in the Hawaiian Kingdom before we create a study abroad program. So we're not sending students away because we think our education here is not good. In fact, it's the opposite. We were sending students, and our country created the first study abroad program because our educational system was so awesome here and so advanced and progressive that this was like supplementing an already beautiful educational system. And then the second point that makes this program possible, why our country creates the first study abroad program in the world, is because Hawaiians have been traveling for a very long time. So this idea of Hawaiian huaka'i, just of course we would create the first study abroad program. We're a very traveling, travel is an essential part of Hawaiian identity almost. And then lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about our international network and infrastructure. So our treaties, our consulates, what we're celebrating today, right? We're celebrating today the signing of the first international treaty that the Hawaiian Kingdom secured, but we had many more that followed by the time we created our study abroad program in 1880. So these are, this is not the extended presentation version, but essentially a lot of these Hawaiian ali'i and leaders that you see here, pictured here, were helping to create and contribute to a very progressive educational system that we had in the 1800s. So for example, Lahaina Luna is our first college. Lahaina Luna opens its doors in 1831. And what's different about colleges in the rest of the world, right? I said that most of the time universities at this time were only for white men and for the clergy, for the rich, essentially. Well, we create the first college, and we decide that our first college is going to be a teacher training college, which is very beautiful, unique, and almost at odds with how the rest of the world approaches higher education at the time. And not only do we, actually, let me switch. Not only do we train teachers here, but we're also building curriculum at Lahaina Luna. So 3 years after the school opens, we start publishing newspapers at the college, at Lahaina Luna. So the first newspaper is born at our first college, as is a lot of textbooks are starting to be created at Lahaina Luna. So training teachers and building curriculum, right? And this curriculum is immediately kind of disseminated into our community so that other teachers in the community have, classroom materials where Lahaina Luna might be printing. A lot of map making was happening. So maps for the classrooms and then teacher guides to accompany the maps where there were questions for teachers to, kind of work around curriculum that they were creating at Lahaina Luna. So here's some snapshots of some of those early maps that were created at Lahaina Luna. And then let me skip back to, and then Lahaina Luna is not the only educational institutions created in the Hawaiian Kingdom. A lot of even in addition to our public school infrastructure, a lot of our private school infrastructure, schools that you still, that we know of today, Punahou, St. Louis, Iolani, St. Andrew's Priory, these are all not created and they don't show up when America does, right? These are Hawaiian Kingdom institutions that were created in our country. They were birthed during that time. So, they're Hawaiian. We just need to reclaim all of these institutions. So in addition to this educational infrastructure, I also mentioned the international network and infrastructure is what I would argue is another important recipe of what makes it possible for us to create the first study abroad program in 1880. So today we're celebrating 178, right? 178 years since the signing of our first international treaty, known as the Anglo-France Proclamation. But since then, you can see these are just some of the many treaties from that original treaty signed in 1843 till when we create our study abroad program. So I'll just name some of these. We had a treaty with Denmark, Hamburg, the United States, Bremen, France. All of these are created in the subsequent years. So as some context, I showed these pictures earlier, right? So the first three, the cohort that goes to England, they arrive in 1881. So we've had a treaty signed with this country that they're studying in for almost 40 years. So already for almost 2 generations before these students, find their way in England studying, we've already had a treaty for 40 years with that country. And then the same with Italy. When that Italian cohort arrives in Italy in 1881, we already had a treaty signed between the Hawaiian Kingdom and Italy in 1863. So that's not as long as England, but that's still almost 20 years that we've had diplomatic relationships with that country, right? So the takeaway there is, and treaties provide formal protections. For example, just the basic, when a Hawaiian Kingdom subject is studying in that country, that treaty provides protections, in case they run into any kind of trouble or need help from a legal perspective. That treaty provides that kind of protection for them. But larger than that, I think the main takeaway is when these students or these Hawaiians were growing up, they're not. So essentially, they're not traveling to these strange and unfamiliar places, right? They grew up in a time where even in the New Pepa, there's mele and history about Italia and England. So they know about these places, and I would even argue they know more about these places than people from those places know about Hawaii, right? So that's an important context that we were creating the conditions for Hawaiians to know about the world far before the study abroad program is created. Here's some, I just wanted to share. I was always fascinated by all the stationery and letters that I found. The Hawaii State Archives, at Iolani Palace has probably like 7 or 8 big boxes full of information just on the Hawaiian Youth Abroad program. And in those boxes is almost like every receipt for socks and books and everything bought for these students. But it also has important letters that I think demonstrate the hand-holding that was necessary across the world to make this program happen. So you can see, I'm just going to read some, I don't know if you can see all of it, that's why, but Hawaiian Consulate General, San Francisco, we have His Hawaiian Majesty's Service, New York. So these are all the consulates around the world that when, say, some of the students are, heading to their destination and they arrive in New York, you'll get a letter from that consulate saying, okay, they arrived, they're headed out on the next steamer to England. So you see all of these different, it shows the network that made it possible. We also got Hawaiian Consulate London here, His Hawaiian Majesty's Consulate Turin, Naples, Genoa, and Glasgow, Scotland. So literally around the world, we already had these offices in place that made it possible for these students to study in those 6 different countries around the world. And then the last kind of piece that I talked about, Hawaiians have been traveling the world for a very long time. I highlighted here some photos of, whether it's Humehume, who was the son of Kaumuali'i and went to study in the United States in 1804. We have Liholiho and Kamamalu, who traveled to London in 1824 and passed away there. Timoteo Ha'alilio and his famous journey that we celebrate today. This is Kapi'olani and Lili'uokalani at the Queen's Jubilee in England. Curtis Iokea, one of our other diplomats who helped to check on the status of our existing treaties around the world. So these Hawaiians and others, have been traveling the globe for a very long time. These are just some of their names. I'm just going to transition real quick and show a video that was published by one of our students about, I'm going to transition now into our revival of the program and kind of bringing light and honoring that original program. The sound is minimal. Stop right here. So this is us the first year in 2018. So we're at the National Archives in London. And so I had never been there before, and here I am ushering 13 students. So I had to do a lot of research ahead of time of, what is in the National Archives in London. But again, I haven't been there. So I request all these documents. They have it ready for us in this little locker. But it's a bunch of information, right? So probably 2 dozen or so boxes. So I kind of split it up amongst the students and was like, okay, everybody take a box and dig through it. Let me know what you find. Everybody go to your own little desk. So that student in the middle, Kamuala, I don't know, a couple minutes in, he kind of leans back and he's crying. And we're like, what? What do you got? What do you got? And he just he can't even talk and he's just pointing. So this is us huddled around to see what what's all this commotion about? And let me rewind a little bit. I'm so glad we caught this on video. So that little red folder you see back there is the Anglo-France Proclamation, the actual treaty signed with the seal and everything, celebrating, or what we celebrate today is the signing of that actual document. So I'll just play it again. And he goes, "Can I touch it?" And I was like, "Of course you better touch it because we're going to touch it." So he even has the seal, and we have the photo of him. So I always stop it to show that because it was such a special moment. Okay. So yeah, that small film was created by one of the students in our program in the first year. So for those students in the audience that are contemplating come to Manoa, I hope you do, because these are the kinds of examples of programs that are left behind by our country and our ancestors that we're trying to breathe life back into and use it as an inspiration today for students at Manoa. So this first picture we took 13 students the first year and 14 students the second year. I shout out and full circle to Kanaio Kana, who provided us funds for that first round, helping to supplement student travel costs. But so this picture is of the 2018 cohort, so 10 undergraduate students and 3 Hawaiian doctoral students that want to become professors. So we took them in 2018, and then this is the program for 2019. So it's a 4-credit experience. So students are in summer school with us before we leave. We spend like a couple weeks on Oahu before we fly out to Europe. So in 2019, we went to the Royal Archives at Windsor. This is what the Royal Archives at Windsor looks like. Windsor Castle, like what is that? Is it Harry got married recently? That's where the archives is, the Royal Archives. So the Royal Archives houses everything from crown to crown. So important things that they have about the Hawaiian Kingdom that's there at the Royal Archives are like when Lili'u and Kapi'olani visited for the Queen's Jubilee. They have all the information about the seating charts and how they were, guests of honor at the Queen's Jubilee. They also have a signed letter from Kamehameha to King George III. That's there, one of the original and only signatures that we know of Kamehameha Ekahi. And then we went to the National Archives as well, and that's that last from the video, right? That's the equivalent of their state or government archive. We visited, so 3 students passed away in the program, the original program in the 1800s. They all got sick while they were away in Europe. So I told you about Dr. Matthew Makalua that, he died, after a long, beautiful medical career in England. But there's 2 others who died in the program. Joseph Kamau'oha passed away also in England. So we visited his grave in 2019, as well as Matthew Makalua's grave again. And then the final resting place of James Booth, who passed away in Italy. So that was like something important that we wanted to honor them. And what's sad about the other 2, that they're in unmarked graves, perhaps very few visitors all these 100+ years, so it was important for us to honor them. We also I have a slide dedicated to this, but we visited the College of Arms in London too, which is kind of related to our holiday, La Kūʻokoʻa today. When Richards and Ha'alilio were in London, trying to secure that treaty that we're celebrating today, they also visited this College of Arms, which it's a very old British entity who used to do like all the seals and crests for families, but they were there to work on the Hawaiian coat of arms at the College of Arms. So I'll show you a slide of one of the earlier drafts of our Hawaiian coat of arms that we found in London for that visit. And then we also went to Italy, so we visited the military academies that the 3 boys from the Italian cohort stayed at. Let me just kind of go through this. So when we were at the National Archives, that's the Anglo-France proclamation, we did a photo shoot with our treaty, and then as we're leaving, one of the archivists there came up to me. They're like, "Oh, are you in charge here?" And I was like, "Oh, yes. Is everything okay?" She's like, "Oh, I just wanted to let you know that at our archive, you can take pictures of the document, but you can't take pictures like with the document. Like, there's no photo shoots in here." I was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." This is after like all 20 of us already did it. So she said, "It's okay because all of us staff, we have never seen people so excited for any of the documents in our archives, so we just kind of let you guys go." So this is the illegal photo shoot. Some other highlights that we did over the 2 years, Liho Liho and Kamamalu, I mentioned them earlier. They were in London in 1823 and 1824. So we try to like kind of retrace some of the places that they went to. They went to some theaters and whatnot. So we did a little bit of walking tour and retracing some of their journey in 1824. Lot Kapuaiwa and Alexander Liho Liho, before they become Mo'i, before they become Kamehameha 4th and 5th, they traveled to Europe as well. And the journal of Alexander Liho Liho kind of chronicles some of their travels. So in that spirit, we visited Versailles and the Louvre and kind of read it side by side, their journal entries when they were visiting almost, 150 years before we traveled there. I mentioned College of Arms too. So London is a very different city today than when our kupuna traveled. It's a very modern, even the streets are no longer the same as when our kupuna traveled, right? It's completely new grid. But in Italy, it's very old cities, and a lot of the very buildings that our kupuna would have seen, in the 1840s or late 1800s, are the same as they are today. So that was really cool. So we were also trying to track down some of our consulates. So London, that wasn't possible. But in Italy, we actually went to the site of 2 of the original, where our consulates would have been. So this is, so in Turin, we went to the actual building, we found it. We couldn't get inside because it's like private, like it was a law office, like where the Hawaiian Kingdom consulate was, like on the 2nd floor. It's like a law office today, and we just couldn't get in. But we saw a little flagpole outside, and so we put a Hawaiian flag in the flagpole. And then this was really special. So in Naples, let me go back. In Naples, the actual building where the Hawaiian consulate was destroyed in World War II by American forces. The irony. But today, it's a newer building that's in its place, and it's a grocery store. So with some help from some people to translate, we made friends with the grocery store owner and told him that this was the Hawaiian Kingdom consulate. And he's like, "Hawaii? America?" And we're like, "Oh, no, we're occupied." And he's like, "Oh, okay." So we give him a Hawaiian flag, and we reproduce, I don't know if you can see it there, that sticker. We made stickers with the stationery that we found that said Hawaiian Kingdom Consulate, Naples, Turin. So we made all these stickers, and we took it with us. So we have a video of our interaction with the grocery store owner. So I just want to play this real quick. So he takes out a ladder and puts the Hawaiian flag at the front of his store. We kept trying to give him business the rest of the next couple days we were there, and he was still telling his patrons, oh, this was the Hawaiian Kingdom Consulate. So next time you guys are in Naples, we'll give you the address and go check on our friend, see if our Hawaiian flag is still there. We also visited the military academies in Turin and Naples. So on the left is in Turin, and these are the equivalent. It was very challenging to get into them. What is that American military academy, like West Point? It's the equivalent of like just running into like, hey, can we like check out your campus? Like there's extensive security clearances that are required like months before we even traveled there. So it was a big deal to get into these places, and I have to mahalo. We have a friend, her name is Dr. Manu Borgino. She's Italian, she's actually from Turin, but she spent some time out here. And I think actually Auntie Lynette also knows her. She had visited different people when she came out for about a year, several years ago. So she's originally from Turin, and she wanted to study like, she has research interest in like indigenous education. So she was here, I contacted her, and she was kind of our tour guide throughout Italy and even helped us get into these places. So, and it was actually when she was here that somebody had told her, someone in our community was like, oh, Turin, Robert Wilcox? And she's like, who's Robert Wilcox? And proceeded for us to tell her the story of how a Hawaiian spent 6 years living in her hometown in Turin. So when she went back, she spent a lot of time learning about who Wilcox was, where he studied. She even knew like what restaurants he used to frequent, because all of this has paper trails that you can still get in touch with today, right? All the letters that Wilcox wrote. So that's us at the military academy at Turin on the left. So when we visited, it was their graduation day, and they told us at the graduation ceremonies that we were invited to stay for their graduation. That ceremony is largely unchanged, even down to the uniform, to what Robert Wilcox would have participated in when he graduated, which is special because Wilcox probably didn't have any guests. It was just his friends there from his institution, and we also visited their little library. So they said, oh, we pulled up as much information from the original Hawaiians who studied there because James Booth, the one who passed away in the program, he also studied at this institution. And so they said, oh, we only have photos from one of the students. And we assumed it was Robert Wilcox because Wilcox had so many photos taken, right? And we still hadn't seen a picture of Booth, ever. And lo and behold, they had the picture of Booth there. So I have it at the end. I'll show it to you. But so that was at Turin. And then the photo on the right is when we visited the military academy at Naples. And it was really cool to see. They considered us, almost like they thought we were like a diplomatic trip. They're like, oh, the diplomats from the Hawaiian Kingdom. We're like, oh, no, we're just visitors. These are pictures from us at the final resting place of the three who passed away in the program. In the center is Matthew Makalua, so he's buried with his wife, and he's in a marked grave. But the two on the ends, James Booth in Italy on the left, and then Joseph Kama'o on the right, who's in an unmarked grave. That was also a special. We purchased, European flowers and made lei on the trains and stuff. We did the best we could, though, to honor them. Took vai from their homelands. So got to mahalo the students for gathering that. We got fresh water from Lahaina, fresh water from Kona, because Joseph Kama'oha is from Kona. So, and then we have a travel blog that's on our Native Hawaiian Student Services website that each of the students in the program were responsible for gathering archival research about either one of the Hawaiians who participated in the original study abroad program or one of our Hawaiian ali'i or diplomats who traveled to the cities that we did, so that we could attempt to, retrace their path, but also share it with our community, anybody who was interested. So it's on our website, and we also created posters from the 2019 group of students. And in fact, they were at the Nanakuli Public Library. They're still there, actually, because I think we did a presentation with you in late January 2020, right before COVID hit. And so we intended to keep it at the Nanakuli Public Library for, a couple of months, and then COVID hit, so it's been there for 2 years. And then we intended to put it like on tour and take it to, other sites for people to engage in the research we compiled. These are the research posters. I want to say all of them were at the Nanakuli Public Library. This was the College of Arms visit that we did in London that I mentioned. So Richards, I know for sure Richards visited the College of Arms, but I don't know if Ha'alilio accompanied him on this particular visit. But the College of Arms is right there in downtown London. Still there, we visited and asked to see what they had on record here, which was dated October 1843. And it says William Richards, an envoy from the King of the Sandwich Islands. So this was an early draft of the Hawaiian Coat of Arms that they were working on when they were there trying to secure the signing of the treaty, just that would follow a month later. But you can see very different than the Coat of Arms we know today. And then a lot of this text was information they received from Richard's Ma, like for updating and revising the Coat of Arms to not look like so much like this. But just interesting that that's part of it. And then this is back to the quote that I mentioned in the start of this presentation and the title of this presentation. So Robert Ho'opili Baker, the Hawaiian Kingdom legislator who was the one who motioned to create a bill to fund this study abroad program, he delivers a speech on November 28th on Kūʻokoʻa, 1885. And it's a beautiful speech that I just wanted to read to you folks because I think it ties in a lot of what my presentation was attempting to highlight. The intersection of our educational system in the Hawaiian Kingdom, this idea of how our educational pursuits tie into our goals for the independence and preservation of the independence of our state, and traveling. So this is the words of Robert Ho'opili Baker. We have just cause to feel proud of our schools, both public and private, in the fostering hands of our government. They may be found in almost every town and village of the land, and through their influence, much good is done, as it is by moral and not by physical force that the integrity and independence of the state will be preserved. There is a greater and wider world beyond the limits of these islands, and it is therefore with satisfaction that I have watched the results of that education by travel, which has been the fortunate lot of His Majesty and other distinguished Hawaiians, and is still of several young Hawaiians who are obtaining an education abroad, which will enable them to be of service to their country. It is gratifying to know that they are spoken highly of by their preceptors and rank high among their scholastic competitors. Broad and liberal views and a knowledge of countries and ideas are necessary to cope with the advance of the age, and it is by the accretion of ideas gained elsewhere that those who are destined by Providence to lead us are made worthy of the office. Such a course of education by its results is not extravagance, but money well invested. A nation can scarcely be too lavish in the training of its children. So again, November 28th, Kūʻokoʻa, 1885, and there's so much about his speech that I like, but even one piece that he talks about in the beginning, it is by moral and not by physical force that the integrity and independence of the state will be preserved. He and others talk about this idea a lot, like to almost imply that our military is our educated populace. That's how we're gonna fight to protect the independence of our state. So yeah, I just wanted to bring it home. This is something that he literally delivered to this day in 1885, and I think it's a reminder for us when we celebrate Kūʻokoʻa, the independence of our country. How was our country and our kupuna understanding what sovereignty means and what it means to be independent and the kind of values that it instilled into something like that and in our celebration of it today. Yeah, so anybody have any questions or? This is pictures of us when we're making lei and whatnot, taking lei needles halfway around the world, making lei on the trains, those kinds of interactions. People are like, what are these people doing? But those were the moments that were, I think, especially special. This is the 2019 cohort. We have actually some students who participate in the program walking around. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'll stick around. Oh, we also have, from our office, we brought some materials up here. We created a newspaper, like in the spirit of a newspaper, about information, history, pieces from the newspapers about La Kūʻokoʻa, how our kupuna celebrated it. Some of that treaty history is in this up here. Please take whatever. It's free. Got some Hi Hawaii and some pins. But yeah, we'll stick around if you guys have any questions. And mahalo nui. Aloha La Kūʻokoʻa.